It is postseason preview time. Let's dig a little bit deeper into the team tendencies and oddities in the data that I think matter most for this inevitably electric October, and my World Series bracket will be presented at the end of this video. Mariners win totals over the last 5 seasons are 90, 85, 88, 90, and 90, and this is just the second time in that 5-year span that they have made the playoffs overall. You could argue it's pretty insanely bad luck, despite a really strong team from an offensive and pitching standpoint in each of those last 5 seasons. Before the season started, I saw a stat that even if you predicted run differential for a team perfectly, how those runs are allocated game to game can result in basically a 6 to 7 win variance. So this is saying if you score as many as you allow and you're an 81 and 81 team, it's within the range of reasonable to think you win anywhere from 75 to 87 games, which is a massive gap. It's a long way for me to say the Mariners have run into the bad side of some random variance. They're right there with the Phillies this season on having some of the best pitching from an underlying metrics standpoint in all of baseball. They're just doing it in a very unique way. They throw a ton of fastballs. They have 3 starting pitchers inside the top 15 in terms of how many four-seamers and sinkers they throw. I'm talking Bryan Woo, Luis Castillo. Those guys are number 1 and number 2, but you also have George Kirby down at 15th here. Kirby has been stellar of late. He's my pick to be one of the best pitchers in the postseason. Since August, he has a 2.95 expected fielder independent pitching. His results have been slightly worse. He's actually pushed up his sinker usage to lefties as well, so he'd probably be even higher up on that list I just showed of heavy fastball users. And I've buried the lead a lot, but they have the big dumper. Yes, they're right on par with the Mets, Dodgers, and Yankees from a weighted runs created plus standpoint. This is a very strong offense. It's not purely carried by a guy like Cal Raleigh. It's also not surprising that a lot of the playoff teams I'm going to talk about in this video do not have massive split issues versus a certain handedness of pitcher. The Mariners are squarely in that category as being pretty neutral from a platoon standpoint. The Mariners' X factor for me is Bryan Woo. I think he's one of the best pitchers in all of baseball, period. He has a flat approach fastball. He developed a sinker, and he's throwing them a bunch, very successful combination of pitches, but he has a small pec issue that held him out of the last week of the season. It sounds like he'll be fine, but if you're going into a 5 or 7 game series against the Mariners and Woo is starting games, that is a massive pitching boost beyond their top 3 or so in their rotation that are already very good arms. The Phillies have been in the playoffs in each of the last 3 seasons. It's just unfortunate that they've exited in an earlier round in each of those years as they have progressed. This kind of feels like it might be one of the final iterations of this specific Phillies team, as you have Ranger Suarez, Kyle Schwarber, and GT Realmuto all as free agents this offseason. Schwarber is probably the most interesting piece here. He has a 25% barrel rate since the All-Star break, second best in Major League Baseball. Something in the 8 to 9% window is average. He's a really interesting hitter to approach from a game planning standpoint. I say this because he destroys four-seam fastballs. And with how much he whiffs on breaking balls, you'd expect the approach here to just be spin him to death, but you can get him to whiff in zone against fastball. So it's probably, I'll say, the most volatile in zone results of any hitter against any one individual pitch in the playoffs. Basically, can you tolerate the risk of giving up a barrel to him if you're hunting whiffs in the zone? I think this is actually a really good way to frame a lot of the pitch selection decisions that you'll see in the playoffs, especially retrospectively. If a guy allows a barrel, think about where he's successful as a pitcher versus what that hitter is good at doing, and think about whether he went off his strength to attack the hitter weakness or vice versa. The Phillies offense on the whole, however, is very good. Top 3 in WRC+. Trey Turner's sneaky great offensive season. He cut his chase rate a bit, and his strikeouts have dropped as a result. The Phillies' pitching fingerprint is that they have the best left-handed pitching in baseball, which will become even more important given the absence of Zach Wheeler. Their 3-headed monster is Cristopher, Sanchez, Jesus Luzardo, and Ranger Suarez. All 3 have had pretty amazing seasons. It's worth noting the Dodgers have one of the best offenses versus left-handed pitching if that ends up being a matchup late in the playoffs. Cristopher Sanchez is one of my favorite pitchers in baseball because he is incredibly simple and yet interesting at the same time. So he's 6'6". He's got big extension down the mound up at 7 feet, almost half a foot above the major league average. And his arm angle is a low, about 30 degrees. So he's kind of like a low 3/4 guy. The average is around 40 degrees. The way I point out his oddity is that if you look at pitchers with that same low 3/4, 30 degree-ish arm angle, that have 7 feet or more of extension, you'd expect their release point to be about 5.5 feet. Cristopher Sanchez, Bailey Ober, and Gavin Williams are the 3 pitchers with around that same slot that have a release actually greater than 5.9 feet, so about 6 feet. That again is about a half foot higher than average. So it's a long way to say this is a really weird look for a hitter. And on top of that, Cristopher Sanchez throws 3 pitches, all of them down in the zone. So you could basically go up there and say, I know this pitch is going to be down, and you're still not going to hit it. To me, he is their X factor. He's the most fascinating pitcher in baseball, and he needs to run through the NL in order for the Phillies to make the World Series without Zach Wheeler. The big thing for the Brewers is that they just don't barrel the ball. They have a 6.6% barrel rate this season. The average is right at 8.5%. And one of my favorite statistics that I found in rummaging through all this info for this video is that the last 20 World Series teams, just one of them had a bottom 5 barrel rate in the league, and that was the 2023 Arizona Diamondbacks. So it can be done. To me, however, it's very unlikely. Now, this isn't the end-all be-all. They're not going to be my World Series pick. I'll spoil that, but they're just going to have to score without much slug. The positive spin is that they don't strike out at all. Bottom 5 K rate in the league. They also have a top 5 walk rate, and they're the top base running team in the league, and they're one of the top 3 defensive teams in the league. Somebody in their organization told me this year that their results were not done with the intent of being less analytical. It's just that I and a lot of other people around the league categorize them as kind of this old school, scrappy, do all the subtle things correctly, and they've won a lot of games. It's just different analytics, right? Contact rate isn't less analytical than barrel rate, I would say. It's just that everybody thinks the 3 true outcome approach is the way to approach the game, whereas the Brewers have found success offensively doing everything else that is not putting bat on ball very hard at the correct angles. On the pitching side, their very distinct feature is that they throw a bunch of cutters, 3rd most in baseball. They also throw the most in the minor leagues, very much like an organizational philosophy. The Brewers are a very good team. They were scorching hot for a period of time. That's how you get to nearly 100 wins. Best run differential in baseball, 3rd most runs scored in baseball, so don't let my anti-barrel approach kind of misguide their ability to score. I just think barreling the ball in the postseason is generally how you win. But I have no idea what vibes guy Pat Murphy thinks. The X Factor player here for me is this guy, Isaac Collins. So he is not particularly great against four-seam fastballs, but he is crushing breaking balls and cutters. The path of his swing just works really well down in the zone and not so much up. I think he could be a really fun matchup piece against a breaker-heavy reliever in a leverage spot. The Blue Jays offense is really good. They have the top batting average and OBP in the league. They don't really slug a ton, but they make a ton of contact and they do not strike out at all. They're kind of like a souped up version of the Brewers, in my opinion, where you have a bit more slug alongside really good swing decisions. George Springer is their best hitter this year too, not Bo Bichette or Vlad Guerrero Jr. The clear deficiency of the Blue Jays is that they allow the most barrels in baseball as a pitching staff, just above the Rockies, which is not good. And it's a combo of both their starters and their relievers. Chad Green and Jeff Hoffman both have 13% or worse barrel rates. Again, that average is right around 8.5. Scherzer, Bowden Francis, Jose Barrios, Shane Bieber in a small sample for what it's worth, all have 11% or worse barrel rates in the Blue Jays rotation. Hoffman is the guy they paid some money for this offseason after some other teams spotted some issues with his medicals. His four-seam has gotten pounded this season, 25% barrel rate on that pitch. So he's throwing more splitter as a result, especially to left-handed hitters. That's been a really good pitch. Both his slider and his splitter are good. He's just ripping four-seam fastball over the plate, and it's getting touched up really hard. You can mix around the X factors here to me. I'd love to see their pitching prospect, Trey Savage, used in leverage spots as a reliever. He's a really weird look for a hitter seeing him for the first time, and I think that is a subtle advantage in the postseason. Hoffman, who I just spoke about, is another X factor that they're gonna need to step up, but I'll go for a hitter here, because if this team is winning, it is probably through their offense. The X factor for me is Dalton Varsho. He's a pretty electric combo of good defense, and he upped his barrel rate a ton this season, mostly due to a bat speed jump. He's not like a high average hitter, which is most of this lineup, as I talked about, but I think he could be a subtle game breaker. Weird profile too, because he's not great versus spin or velocity. He just seems to be like high variance on mistakes in the zone, and I think that has a nice place in the postseason. The big question with the Dodgers this postseason is whether they have the bullpen depth to make a deep run. Their relievers right now are basically dead average in the league in terms of expected fielder independent pitching, or xFIP, and in the last 2 months of the season or so, they've been bottom 10 in the league pretty squarely in that same metric. Jack Dreyer may be their best reliever presently. He's kind of like an Alex Vesia clone. The two guys they paid, Kirby Yates and Tanner Scott, have both been not so good. Yates more because of injury, and I think you could also say that about Blake Trinan as well. Scott because he has been in the zone too much, which is a really odd one. The two options they have that intrigue me a lot are Emmett Sheehan and Roki Sasaki. Sheehan is one of the best sliders in Major League Baseball since August, and he's been throwing it a bunch, especially in two-strike situations. Sasaki's velocity is back. He looks stellar in Game 2 of the wild card against the Reds. He was like 94, 95 before the break, and now he's way back up to about 99, 100 in terms of his average four-seam velocity. The fun thing to consider is whether the weakness of their bullpen actually forces them to use their incredible starting rotation more and let those guys stay in the game late. Think back to Blake Snell being pulled in 2020. That Rays pen was pretty good. This Dodgers pen arguably isn't. So maybe the numbers actually say to leave the guy in a third or fourth time through an order if they're cruising like a Blake Snell or even a Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Or I guess you could just use guys like Tyler Glasnow out of the pen in multi-inning reliever roles, and then none of this is an issue. Yamamoto has been unbelievable lately. Peek at his rolling four-seam usage graph on Fangraphs, and you can see that he's using fewer four-seam fastballs in the last month or so, and his results have been stellar as a result. He's throwing more splitters to lefties and sinkers to righties to make up for that four-seam usage, and his walk rate hasn't budged. I don't think you need me to tell you that their offense is really good. Second most in runs scored, second most home runs. The layer that I love for the postseason is that they crush velocity. Highest context neutral run value in baseball against pitches 95 miles per hour or harder. They also have the highest xWOBA against that same level of velocity. I don't think you're going to win throwing them fastballs. My X factor could easily be the bullpen pieces I just mentioned, but I want to highlight a hitter here. Let's go with Max Muncy. Please do not throw him a hittable fastball. He absolutely mashes them. He's also an on-base and barrels machine against right-handed pitching. He's going to give other teams fits. Yeah, he's dealt with injury stuff this year, but he has been extremely sharp down the stretch. The Cubs are a fascinating team from a variety of perspectives this season, which we will dig into in a moment, but I bet you didn't know that three of their best relievers this year are Brad Keller, Drew Pomeranz, yes, that Drew Pomeranz, and Caleb Thielbar. Those guys have done a really good job and are the primary reason this team has the lowest xFIP since the All-Star break among relievers. The unfortunate thing is that they lost their best pitcher, Cade Horton, right before the playoffs, and they're not entirely sure if they're going to get him back at any point, so they're left with Matthew Boyd, who hasn't thrown more than 78 innings since 2019 and is currently sitting on 180 plus, and Shota Imanaga. Both of these guys have worse than league average ERAs since the All-Star break. The feature of this team from a pitching standpoint is that they are very aggressive with strike throwing. Pre-two-strike zone rates and usage rates are something a lot of organizations look at to gauge plan of attack. And the Cubs are number one in baseball this season in terms of pre-two-strike zone rate, right next to some other teams that have great pitching. But the even more distinct thing is that they're doing it with a bunch of four-seam fastballs specifically, which is very unlike some of the other teams around them who throw a lot more non-four-seamers early in counts. This is slightly terrifying because if they get deep into the National League bracket, they'll have to face the Dodgers or the Phillies, who are two of the best teams in baseball at destroying exactly what they throw, four-seam fastballs. Now, their offense is really good, however, in a sneaky way because they're not often brought up with the likes of the Yankees or the Dodgers or other teams I've mentioned in this preview. This could be because they were as productive as the Chicago White Sox offense in the second half of the season. As you can see, the theme here is that they were really good earlier in the season and they just haven't been the same since. There probably isn't another team that stumbled more down the stretch despite putting up 92 wins in total. And they're still hanging around in the playoffs going into a series with the Brewers that I think they can legitimately win because they barrel the ball a lot more than Milwaukee. Seiya Suzuki and Michael Busch have had career years. Nico Horner and Dansby Swanson have been great as well. But their X factors, yes, plural, are pretty clear to me. Pete Crow Armstrong and Kyle Tucker, both of which were amazing to start the season and have not been that great since. Now, PCA can impact the game in a variety of ways. His at-bats have just been kind of rough down the stretch and early in the postseason. Tucker, however, is in that lineup to hit balls very far and get on base, and he hasn't done a lot of the former. He played through a broken hand earlier this season, and then he went to a personal physical therapist in Tampa for treatment on his calf, and he has mostly not looked that great at the plate since. If they're going to make a run, it would be incredibly valuable for these guys to step up. The New York Yankees have the best offense in baseball by a pretty decent margin. Now, they probably wouldn't if you remove Aaron Judge, but they have a lot of good hitters. Ben Rice, Giancarlo Stanton, Jazz Chisholm, Trent Grisham, all those guys are at least 25% better than the major league average hitter, and that means a lot. They have the highest walk rate in the league by a decent margin, the highest barrel rate. This is kind of an offense that can quiet the idea that great pitching beats great hitting all the time. Judge's postseason exploits are going to be a continual topic. It is a bit weird that this good of a hitter is only like a 770-ish OPS guy in the playoffs, but it doesn't take a lot to turn that around. The Yankees pitching staff is pretty good all around as well. They throw changeups and splitters at the highest rate in baseball from the 6th inning onward. That's kind of my weird way to figure out how much relievers throw those specific pitches. They're also up there in terms of right-on-right changeup usage, which is a subtle thing that I love. They added David Bednar and Camilo Doval at the deadline. And you might hate it, but Devin Williams has been their most valuable reliever on their team this season because his underlying peripherals, even in the midst of his 4.79 ERA season, have been pretty good, striking out a ton of batters, not really allowing a lot of barrels. He also has some postseason demons that he needs to exercise. Maybe that's the theme of this Yankees team. Just do it in the postseason so everyone stops talking about how you can't do it in the postseason. Fangraphs actually has a stat known as clutch, which is essentially how do you perform in those leverage spots relative to your individual average performance. And the Yankees offense is actually the least clutch in baseball this season. I don't really know if this is predictive, but I was a bit surprised. Now, it's not all bad, though. This team is still pretty good. They worked some magic with both Max Fried and Carlos Rodon this season. Impressive that they have top 10 value via WAR with their starting pitchers despite the loss of Garrett Cole. Fried throws what you call a cut four-seam fastball, and this season he kind of added a true four-seam fastball alongside it. He also adjusted his sinker to one that's more a one-seamer. The Yankees have made a really sharp bet here, paying him market value and then knowing they had some tweaks in the bag to make him even better than market value. This is what good development teams with money do. They pay a lot of money for good players and then they make them even better. I love this Cam Schlittler kid they have as well. He's using his fastball a lot relative to what he did in the minors, and it's been super sharp against major league hitters. His cutter slider shape is one of the best in baseball from a metrics or stuff standpoint as well. Just not a lot of guys that can hold velocity and create this amount of depth like he can. Schlittler also gained 5 miles per hour of velocity over the last calendar year. I'm talking average fastball velocity, which is pure insanity. And I'll go back to a hitter for their X factor as well. Give me Ben Rice, who's the third best hitter on this team against right-handed pitching since July. A nice step better than guys like Cody Bellinger and Jazz Chisholm. Now, I know those two guys I just mentioned are also good enough to hit lefty pitching, whereas Rice is going to be platoon, but he completely changes the complexion of the Yankees lineup against a right-handed pitcher because everybody's concerned about Judge and Stan when you really should be concerned about Ben Rice, who on average is actually putting the ball in play with damage far more frequently than either of those other two mammoths in the Yankees lineup. The Tigers kind of imploded, lost the AL Central title, and then ended up advancing past the Guardians in the wildcard round, so I don't know how much the title for the Central really mattered, and I'm far happier that the Tigers have a shot to beat the Mariners than the Guardians, because I don't think the Guardians team was that good, but this Tigers team is a lot more intriguing. Now, the Tigers offense is more average than electric, whereas the Guardians is literally on par with the Pirates and the White Sox, which is why I didn't want them playing the Mariners. The interesting thing about the Tigers offense, however, is that they're actually better against left-handed pitching than they are right-handed pitching. Not like a massive gap, but the biggest gap among teams still in the playoffs offensively. Now, this isn't going to matter too much, I don't think, against the Mariners, but if the Yankees advance to the CS and face them, I think it will with guys like Max Fried and Carlos Rodon. You could argue the Tigers would have a subtle edge in that series, maybe. Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson are the hitters that you fear in this lineup, but Kerry Carpenter, Gleyber Torres, Zach McKinstry have all been pretty productive as well. They strike out a bit as a team, but they also walk at the third highest clip in baseball. I don't have too much confidence they'll get to these elite Mariners right-handed pitchers, but they definitely have a better shot than the Guardians, who, yes, I'm finally done burying. Now, for the Tigers pitchers, it all revolves around the best pitcher in all of baseball, Tarik Skubal. He's going to win a Cy Young. He might pitch next year for Team USA in the World Baseball Classic if Scott Boras allows him to. And then he might win another Cy Young next year. And at that point, he's bound to get the biggest free agent starting pitcher contract in history. Now, I'm definitely nitpicking, but he has been a touch more hittable in the second half of the season if you're a right-handed hitter. This stems mostly from his four-seam fastball damage allowed in the zone. I think this is related to him cutting his four-seamer a lot more this season than he has in the past. So basically, the pitch is not running as much to his arm side, perhaps creating a different visual for hitters in the strike zone. Now, it's still an incredible pitch, and with how much he generated miss and the lack of contact quality in the zone that hitters are able to muster, the balance or risk reward is far worth it for him to just rip this thing in zone. But when he does give up damage, it's almost all coming on this centralized four-seamer. The subtle knock on their team is that their bullpen really isn't too great. They have the second lowest strikeout rate among relievers. They limit barrels pretty well. This isn't like a bad unit. I just think it's a very concentrated unit. Will Vest is amazing. He's one of the best relievers in all of baseball that no one really knows about. But then there's a pretty big gap to him and Kyle Finnegan, who they added at the deadline from the Nationals. And they have him throwing a bunch more splitters. They really cut back on Finnegan's four-seam fastball usage. This was one of the most obvious, please just change this guy's mix points in all of baseball. And I imagine the Nationals' new brass will catch this in the future, but the Tigers were able to reap the rewards of it. No surprise that he's been great since this adjustment as well. He is my X factor because he can make me look dumb about saying this bullpen isn't that great by stepping up and being a lighter version of Will Vest. If you made it this deep into the video, congratulations, you are now taking a look at my postseason bracket, which is not really too dissimilar from a variety of the other really good brackets I've seen out there from people. There's only so many ways you can slice this onion, so to speak. But I also kind of cheated. I filled it out after the wild card here so we know who won these wild card series. That is just a consequence of when this video has come out. But I have the Mariners beating the Tigers, the Yankees beating the Blue Jays, the Mariners eventually beating the Yankees to get to the World Series as the American League's representative. On the National League side, I have the Dodgers over the Phillies, and I have the Brewers over the Cubs, eventually the Dodgers beating the Brewers to push the Dodgers to the World Series. So it's a West Coast World Series, Dodgers and Mariners, and I have the Dodgers taking it all. Yeah, I know, it's very underwhelming, but this Dodgers team is really good. I think the bullpen concerns are mostly for naught, given that they have Roki Sasaki and Emmett Sheehan, and they can play around with a guy like Ohtani potentially being some kind of leverage reliever if they don't want him to start. That team is just too good offensively, and I think their starting pitching is obviously a massive strength, and they're going to run through a lot of teams. But I'll predict it goes 7, because, of course, if you're not rooting for a Game 7 or the final game, a do-or-die game in any of these series, then I don't know what you're doing with yourself, because the most exciting thing in baseball is a winner-or-go-home game. I hope you enjoy the postseason. Drop your picks in the comments or anything else you want to talk about. X-Factor players is probably the most interesting thing. Who do you think is the guy we look back on and go, man, David Freese or Daniel Murphy or some of these other guys who've had unbelievable postseasons? Who's that going to be this year? I want to hear from you. Thanks for watching, as always, and take care.